I'm here today with the CEO and co-founder of Valo, Jari Salomaa. Now, he's got over 20 years in product and security development with a host of companies, including Nokia, ServiceNow, Barracuda Networks, FireEye, Mandiant, and also Salesforce. So he's got a solid security background and a really deep understanding of the Salesforce platform. Welcome, Jari.
Fantastic. Happy to be here, Daryl. Great to see you.
And you mentioned when we were talking earlier, FireEye Mandiant has a very significant meaning at the moment. Can you expand upon a little bit about that?
Yeah. So having worked at FireEye, the company merged with Mandiant, which then later, a lot has happened, but is now part of Google, and they are the Google Threat Intelligence division. And often the team that if you are suspecting a data breach or you have a validated situation, they have world-class experts to work with you. And Mandiant was also the first to report in late spring, early summer in 2025 of these recent scattered spider attacks that were specifically targeting the Salesforce ecosystem, and have since given a lot of guidance and also worked with a number of impacted customers, which unfortunately appear to be in quite a triple digits, who knows, maybe even in the thousands.
Okay, let's just put this in perspective, because now, as you know, I'm a bit of a treasure hunter when it comes to the release notes. And one of the things that I found in the Spring 26 release notes was that Salesforce discontinued connected apps in favor of using external client apps. Now, if it was something about flow, then I'd be all over it, or if it was a general admin thing. But this is a little bit outside of my experience. So I've got lots and lots of questions around that, like why this change? What do I need to know about this change? And what do we need to do? So many questions, but maybe let's start with, well, why didn't Salesforce make this change?
You are quite the detective, Daryl. I appreciate you keeping an eye out for everybody in the community, and your blogs and your LinkedIn posts are very valuable information for everybody in the community. And to actually answer your questions, so giving a little bit of further context on myself. So I'm also, when I worked at Salesforce, I was a product manager of a bundle called Salesforce Shield. Salesforce Shield is a security add-on product, and we built it to help customers to kind of move towards sensitive data use cases and bring sensitive data into Salesforce. And now, as Salesforce has become, the de facto customer database for many businesses, it has a lot of valuable information. And while some customers may have Salesforce Shield, they may have extra tooling, some posture management tools perhaps, and even monitoring some of the Salesforce logs. Connected apps have been a kind of a nature of Salesforce for many years, in the sense that it's a connected app, a connected platform. You can connect different workflows with Salesforce, be it in marketing or customer service, or record sales calls, customer support calls, and now connected apps, over the years, and the way that Salesforce, the data has grown and the use cases have expanded, has been very attractive now unfortunate for cyber criminals to look into that. How do they get access to this data? And last year, a group called Scattered Spider and Shiny Hunters, two different gangs, collaborated and basically created a wave of cybersecurity attacks into the Salesforce customers using data loader, using Salesloft drift, vulnerability, and data breach scenario, as well as a gainsight. So there were three different methods which all kind of relate now to the connected app architecture. And so that's a little bit of a context why the change is happening. And I'd like to kind of highlight also that Salesforce isn't fully deprecating connected apps. well, and it's not in the sense of immediate shutdown. So you don't have to worry about if you are an ISV or you are using connected apps, they will continue to work. The reason,
yeah. So that they're not going to shut down a connected app that you've got now, but future you'll have to do them in a different way. That's my understanding.
That is correct. That is correct. So the primary goal, I think, of this change is to replace this kind of now aging architecture of connected apps with a more secure external client app, ECA architecture, that then offers better security, and it offers also natively support for the second generation packaging, and it can kind of like help with a clearer separation of duties between developers and admins.
Now, I think we just need to be clear here that it wasn't a vulnerability in the Salesforce platform itself that was utilized here by these hackers, was it?
No, that's correct. So that's good clarification. So often, like these open platforms like Salesforce, the vulnerability may lie in us humans, that it is very easy and simple to connect applications with business systems, business apps like Salesforce. So in this case, they often targeted an individual that had access, typically in customer support scenario, to a lot of valuable customer data, and tricked those users of connecting a connected app into Salesforce. And then, of course, these connected apps are not in the hands of the enterprise, they are in the hands of the cyber criminals themselves.
And when we say trick these customers, like you would think that, yeah, maybe a small customer with, a ma and pa sort of shop might have been the sort of ones that are vulnerable. But wow, when I start to look at the list of those impacted, we're talking Google, we're talking Cisco, we're talking Adidas, Alliance Life Insurance, our own Qantas airline here in Australia, Chanel, Workday, FedEx, Hulu, Disney, Toyota. The list goes on and on.
It is quite an impressive list, and it's further worrying that many organizations, such as these tech companies, airlines, manufacturing, automotive industry, who have multi-million-dollar security budgets, were unable to detect these. And I think that kind of talks a little bit about the architectural changes that Salesforce is implementing, but also a new rising requirement, I think, as these platforms like Salesforce are moving more towards app and agentic use cases where the user is no longer a human, how we can get into the detection and insights of understanding who is connected to our Salesforce and are they truly, legitimate and authorized to have that connection. Auditing that today in Salesforce is very hard.
Yeah, and look, we'll touch on that at the end because I'm sure that you've got a solution that looks at solving some of those problems. But for many of our listeners, we're all a bit nervous now. And if you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and a big company running Salesforce, what are the things that your team should be doing now so that you can sleep soundly at night? Like, you've given me a list of actions, but and look, the first one was to lock down third-party app access. Now, what do we mean by this?
Yeah, so I think the really what I was kind of alluding earlier in point, a rather simple question: who is connected to our Salesforce? That's actually a harder question to ask than we might realize. You have to go into 14, 15 different places, often in Salesforce, to the login history, and you can go into the authorized apps and connected apps. There are different menus, there's different places to kind of gather this information. But I would say the overall guidance is that everybody in the ecosystem should have a good understanding who is connected and what is connected. So the way to do that is in the setup menu. There is two different tabs, or authorized apps, which you can then be moving into trusted apps, as well as then you have all the trusted apps listed under a separate setup menu. And we're happy to put in the links and the help guidance below into the video for everybody to click that and then be able to see their own apps. And this should be done ideally whenever you're introducing any new things inside the environment. So I would say that could be a weekly check, could be a monthly. In some organizations, if change doesn't happen that often, at least quarterly. So please take a look at your connected apps, and make sure if there's any apps that you don't recognize, they're no longer used, they are tied to a vendor that you no longer work with, or they've been just for a trial, or maybe another consultant installed something in your environment, is no longer there. Please remove them. And this is just reduces risk for everyone.
So monitoring that and doing that frequent audit, like that's a risky thing too, though, because people forget. Like you can add them to your calendar and stuff like that, but admins and security people, they get busy. So look, I'm sure there's a better way, but I want to have a look at the number 2 point that you made was treat Salesforce permissions as security controls, not just an admin housekeeping duty. Can you expand a bit what you mean by that?
So absolutely. So when we think about like Salesforce access controls and permissions, many of you might have a traditional way of creating profiles and then associating permissions with profiles. That may be a applicable way to standardize access and make it easier for everybody. But often we should actually think about access as what the user needs to do and what the user needs to access in order to do their job. So getting users off profiles into permission sets, and really like thinking about and auditing perhaps some of your employees, your colleagues around their access requirements, and then continuously understanding the nature of what they need to do, and then removing and minimizing those permissions for these particular reasons, that then if there's any user account compromise, whether it's now to a LinkedIn Sales Navigator or HubSpot or Daryl or Jari's accounts, we are minimizing the impact within those individual accounts, and especially if there's anything related to admin access. And there's certain kinds of, the big 5, which of course is the modify all data, view all, API access, as well as then the customized application and managing profiles and permission sets. So those 5, I think, are very significant and impactful in an organization. So regularly reviewing who can do this. And I bumped into Salesforce orgs that have 70 users and they have like 20 admins. I think it's really an unsafe safe practice. So take a look at that.
I think one of the things that you sort of danced around, but you didn't actually quite spit it out, is that best practice of access to least privilege. Just the amount of information that you need, or just the amount of access that you need to do your job, and no more.
100%. So and I know in some cases it's hard to do, and it's also kind of like a little bit of a pain if you have teammates constantly asking you like, hey, I can't see this, can you give me access? And the humans are kind of like creating more work for the admins to do. But when you think about the downside, and here's a little tip also, that like when these kinds of requests happen, whether it's like, hey, I'm Jari, I'm your colleague, I need access to this, and you get this request, always validate it maybe through a second channel, especially in a smaller organization, that like, if you're a smaller company, it's always a good practice if you're using Slack or Teams or some other way. It's just, hey, what's this request from you? Especially if we are talking about these sensitive permissions where, admin type of accesses, like it's always good to further validate it that like, did this actually originate from you? You never know. It's like if somebody's actually inside your network or pretending to be you and asking these sort of things. So just double checking over.
And don't be taking those requests over the phone.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if you do, validate them with another source. Yeah. You just mentioned about permission sets and those one-offs. One of the other things that you can do is now permission sets now have a time frame. So you could say, well, look, I'll give this guy access, but I'll only give it to him access for 3 or 4 days. And that way, if I forget to revoke it, it's automatically going to revoke, and that reduces the problem as well. So that's just another little technique that you could do.
Great, Daryl.
Back to your original list, restricting data export and bulk access. Can you want to talk a bit more about that for me?
Yeah, so like, often this is a really tricky one, but like, so of course, what we're really dealing here is a humans, behind maybe apps and AI agents wanting data from your Salesforce, so that they can either sell it further or they can extort you. Then I'm going to make this information public if you don't pay me Bitcoin, all of these things. Of course, you also can have internal, disgruntled employees, or maybe it's somebody works in sales and wants to download the customer list and moves to a competitor. Especially with these smarter, attackers have been around now last year. They've actually been inside the environment for many months before they're actually doing the large volume data download. So they're actually observing and monitoring the environment, trying to be in the shadows to see, are we detected? Is someone actually not noticing that we are here? And when you're doing, like, let's say, small volume data exports, running reports and maybe some things, you can kind of like go unnoticed. But obviously, if someone is running like massive, downloading every case, you might have certain thresholds, triggers, limits already in your environment to be known. But overall, I would say that, like, when we are talking about operating in large data volumes, you should always run limits. Make sure that, like, if you have any kinds of thresholds that you think about, that, like, I have million rows of customer data, maybe you can set up the threshold that any kind of a bulk download of 10,000 or more could trigger off of an alert. And if there's any kind of spikes, if there's any kind of activity spikes, and this is of course best practice for any issue, so it could be result of a bad Apex code or any of that. And there's actually a gentleman I met at the Architect Dream in Beachhorn, I think, wrote in the Salesforce Ben blog recently about these kind of like almost like what did he call them, like honeypot fields, where you create sensitive fields inside your Salesforce as a trap, basically to attract the bees to the honey, in a way that, like, seeing if now someone is accessing these fields or downloading these fields, you will then know that someone is actually in Salesforce doing things that they shouldn't do, which I think is a very clever way of, like, really detecting that, like, if you don't trust your employees or others, to then see that, like, hey, who actually accessed these things that shouldn't be accessed. And I think is a pretty clever way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting approach. One of the other points that you made is about hardening user authentication, and many of us have been on the road to make sure that we implement MFA. But you're saying, let's not rely on that alone. What else do we need if multi-factor authentication is not enough?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say best practice is to introduce, MFA, make sure the users are using multi-factor authentication, like, without exception, everywhere inside the environment. It's also important to look into the login IP ranges. You can lock down Salesforce access from specific IP ranges. You can also do the same for apps. Now, of course, we have to kind of bear in mind that, like, we might have mobile users, you might have changing IP addresses. So, like, be careful when you think about it, like, and also, like, there's of course, the option of using VPN. So you actually use virtual private networks and make sure that Salesforce access could only happen inside a VPN. And there's many ways to authenticate to Salesforce. Some of those are inherently insecure. there's pretty good documentation around those insecure methods, but make sure that, like, you know, any kind of legacy authentication that you might have is disabled. And then everybody has access to the login history table, and I hope everyone is very familiar with it. That is the place you can see for any kinds of unusual locations, access times. How is it possible Daryl is in Queensland and perhaps in China at the same time?
Yes. Going back to login IP ranges. Now, I always thought that was a bit dangerous, particularly, and hear me out here, particularly when you've got mobile users, because, okay, if your users are fixed and they're office-based, so let's go back to, you know, pre-COVID days when everybody sat in the office and worked on their Salesforce, that was fine. And we could say, well, if our Salesforce users come from this particular IP range, then we know they're in the office and they're trusted. Mobile's a bit different, because even if you're with the same mobile provider, well, your service reps or your sales reps could be across multiple carriers. Okay, so they're all going to have different IP ranges. And because the mobile carriers sort of came on the internet late in the game, their IP address blocks are much smaller and they're sort of scattered all over the place. And if you're trying to restrict IP ranges based on mobile networks, you'll never, like, it's like trying to play whack-a-mole, because they'll go to a new location and that will have a different IP range and they'll be blocked and they'll be calling up the help desk. But I think the solution to that is a VPN. Correct me if I'm wrong. Then you permit the IP range of the VPN. So basically, they can be anywhere. They can be a McDonald's cafeteria if they want to be, and they connect to the Wi-Fi via their VPN, and it's the VPN connection that you are restricting via the login IP range. Am I on the right track there? Is that the way to do that?
Absolutely. I don't want this to turn an ad for the VPN vendors out there, but these days, especially if you are working from home, you're working from internet cafes, you're working, you know, in public Wi-Fi hotspots from the library, wherever you are, you need to be using a VPN. It's you know, just plain and simple. You need to be able to make sure you are in a VPN, like you're like you know, just, you know, taking unnecessary risks if you're not. I know it's an extra investment for many, but and of course there are different, you know, ranges of laptops and devices, you know, out there, but overall, you know, my recommendation is that, like, you know, you're kind of adhering to the best security practice if you're going with the VPN.
Yep. And interestingly, there was a company in Australia that on the news just recently where they got fined a couple of $1 million for a data breach because they weren't following accepted best practice. And so that would be a great example, wouldn't it? Like, it's pretty well known that for remote access, if you're going to have people in, you know, internet cafes and on insecure Wi-Fi and stuff like that, if you're not doing something to protect your customer data, then yeah, you could certainly be liable for something like that.
Yeah, I think also, and you could look at the other way around. I think with some solutions, if you're investing into security, at least here in the United States, there's quite a popular thing these days is to buy cybersecurity insurance. So yeah. I don't have all the details, but I've heard that, like, you know, the more you invest into cybersecurity solutions, VPNs, and you have your Salesforce security in order, there might be good arguments to lower your insurance premiums because you're actually thinking proactively and securing the environment.
Well, it's like putting locks on all your doors and windows at home. You know, you'll get a cheaper home insurance premium if you're doing, you know, what we would call best practice in that home security market.
Right.
Okay, I want to move on to staff and educating them about approval-based attacks. And if we go back to that Shiny Hunters and some of those calls, some of those earlier breaches, they all started with phone calls or emails, didn't they?
Right, phone calls often, yes, and then a combination of like they already know the login URL, they've done some research into the organization, they often pretend to be working for the IT. And also these larger companies often have outsourced IT, so it's like sometimes really difficult to know when you do get a phone call or you get an email, it looks like it's coming within the company, but is it really? So I would always say that be suspicious of anything that like, feels a little off. There's a sense of urgency that, hey, I need you to do this, or, like an email that like, hey, urgent, like, do this, then alarm bells should go on. And would this person or would our company adhere to this kind of a way or an approach to fix this issue or do something?
Yeah, and like I was always thinking, how could that happen? Because like if it was an IT support person, you'd be looking at the phone and you would see the digits on their phone and you'd see that they're an internal call. But you're right. If this is an outsourced IT service, the guy that's calling or the girl that's calling could be on a mobile because they're out on another customer site somewhere. And so they're just calling in. You've got no ID that you can sort of, nail to them to prove who they actually are. Yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah. So look,
I can also actually, like, maybe I'll just give a quick point here. I don't want to give scare tactics on everybody, but there is this technique also called SIM swapping. So the SIM card in the phones can actually then, swap or look like it would be coming from the person you know. And now in the era of AI, unfortunately, we have also seen attacks where the voice or even a video of the individual looks like a legit person that you would think they are. Obviously, luckily we're not seeing these in the mass, but many of these SIM swapping things can be that especially a text message, it actually looks like it's coming from somebody maybe your colleague, maybe your boss, maybe even the CEO is asking you to do an extraordinary task. And these are the kinds of scenarios that you have to really be careful, because you might actually look like a legit message, but it's really not.
yeah, yes, that's a scary thought, isn't it? Someone SIM swaps and it looks like it's coming from the CEO's phone, and they've got this AI agent that sounds like the CEO, and he's sort of screaming down at the phone at me saying, "Hey, Daryl, I need this access now." What are you going to do? Hang up and say, "Oh, I'm going to call you back in 5 minutes to verify who you are"?
Yeah, I would say, I would say that, like, in that kind of scenario, the CEO would give a tap on the back that thank you for following the process, and I'm gonna like get back to you in 2 minutes, urgently, and then give a call to the CEO, and the CEO is in the middle of the meeting, or says that, hey, what's up? I said, like, I'm just sorry, I'm verifying the request, and maybe a crisis averted.
Yeah, for sure. One of your other points is you recommend to monitor Salesforce like a production system, not just a CRM. Now, I don't quite understand what you mean here. Monitor it like a production system, not just a CRM.
Yeah, so I would say these days, if we look at Salesforce, it's not a SaaS solution anymore. I think, like, a lot of people say Salesforce kind of coined the term SaaS, software as a service. But we look at Salesforce, I think it's a complex platform to run your sales, your marketing, your customer support, custom use cases, and what I think we all know that it's not cheap. This is our labor of love. We're putting our time, as administrators, architects working on it. There may be consultants involved, and there's of course the overall ticket cost. So Salesforce licenses are not cheap. So I think to better understand overall our adoption, the more we know of our users, what they're doing there, how often they log in, what they do, what is the system health performance, like, how this machinery is working. Is my flow actually, are the people following the flow? Are they getting stuck in a certain part of the flow where they don't find the button, or they don't really know what to enter into the form? And then, of course, last but not least, security and compliance. So we all have to adhere to the rule of law, as well as then there are specific regulations around the type of data that we put in Salesforce, which might be subject to specific type of treatment. So Salesforce these days is a platform as a service. Like we have to treat it as such. So we really need to kind of like, put more effort into monitoring and observing Salesforce.
Yeah, you're right. Certainly, in the AI arena, and when you start to use Data Cloud or Data 360, I think as they call it now, and like it's gone way beyond a sales tool, and I guess that's part of the reason why, Benioff even joked about calling it Agent Force, instead of Salesforce, because it's gone way beyond sales. So it's into service, it's into marketing, and then people are expanding beyond that, and it's into production and distribution and so on. So it's sort of running all of the IT systems of your company, and I guess what you're saying is that's a full production system. It's not just this little sales tool that's sort of sitting on the side here. It's now become a real core part of your business. Yeah. And so looking out for, this unusual activity, keeping logs, investigating things, all of that background stuff that happens on those big applications, like we're all familiar with these huge big ERPs and financial systems and so on, and they have this whole team of IT people that are concentrating on looking after all of those back end systems. I guess we need to understand now that Salesforce has gone beyond just the sales team, so we need to be expanding our reach in all of those other areas.
Absolutely. And just practical advice for everybody, having access to the Salesforce setup menu, please visit the login history. It's your best friend. You can download login history, and yes, some of those details might be a little bit gibberish, might be difficult to understand what you're looking at, but the more you're kind of using it, you can recognize patterns and what kind of exists there. And you can download the login history on a regular interval out of your Salesforce, and then to kind of revisit the OAuth conversation around the connected apps. I recommend everybody to go into kind of two places. Under the connected apps, there is the connected app OAuth usage tab, which then shows you all of the apps that are connected into the org, where you can then install apps and you can create policies for them, and you can also block apps within the environment, and then of course you have the different kinds of identity and OAuth custom scopes. You can actually create and customize this further. And then also importantly, I think, if you have any new connected apps, anything kind of like, permissions related to these apps or individual users that change suddenly, very important to keep an eye on, like any kinds of self-escalating privilege users that are kind of like giving them permissions, or a worst case scenario, having admin access and then kicking out other admins from the environment and rendering kind of like your defenses completely. So something to be alerted on.
Okay, now worst case scenarios, we need to plan for those things, and in case there is an incident that occurs, how do we plan for that? What are the sorts of things that we need to do in advance, just in case, worst case scenario, and we have a breach? What should we have done before that?
So of course, these things are quite possible these days, and if obviously from preparedness perspective, we kind of know and what the environment looks like, and we are kind of more intimately familiar with the environment. I think the better opportunities we have to react and remove the things that we suspect are wrong. And what I mean with that is that, if you do not know the environment, it is very difficult for you to kind of like quickly take action if there's something bad inside the system. But one of the things for the Salesforce team especially would be then if we identify the problem, to immediately remove access from it. You can freeze the account, you can revoke the token and make sure they don't have further access, but it could be they're still there. But and we have to further now investigate and use logs to kind of like deepen our understanding, who is here and which accounts, might have this compromise. And it's quite a bit of work for the Salesforce team. You have to be a bit of a detective to actually read these logs. But a good thing here is that there are definitely expert tools available for this, as well as then you can file a ticket to Salesforce support and request additional log information from Salesforce support, and they will provide additional logs, to you and your security team, and you can actually pass a lot of this log information to a security team. And the other aspect, of course, is that depending on your company resources, you could call for external help. So, this could be, company like Mandiant. You can contact my company. There are many different vendors in this industry who can then kind of step in and walk through this very difficult and kind of turbulent situation. And
so sort of being prepared and having a checklist of things that you should do, as you mentioned, shut down access to that application and the user and freeze the user account and so on. But we've also got the IT team, we've got maybe our internal security team, and we've also got our executive team that need to handle the sort of the PR fallout, because this might be, and maybe even legal, because it may be a reportable incident as well.
Right. And of course, in these kinds of scenarios, I think I would recommend everyone in the industry to actually have maybe a tabletop exercise to actually talk through this inside their companies to better understand how they would proceed in a situation like this. And one of the quick things that also come to mind here is that collecting evidence. So you also want to be as transparent and kind of communicate to the stakeholders, your customers, partners, whoever is impacted, that if you're suspecting the issue, but you also want to kind of collect the right amount of evidence to know, so you don't kind of like over communicate or share wrong information, and also you set like realistic expectations that you do not necessarily know yet what has been impacted, and you're creating more work for yourself to collect that evidence that what data was actually accessed or exported by these adversaries. And but you could instead maybe let the customers know this situation is under investigation, and you're looking into this. Is this employee data? Is this an internal thing? But like, for instance, I think many in Australia, Qantas, they send an email to all the customers whose data was impacted. KLM did the same. And I think we're getting a lot of these emails based on where we are doing our business. But I think having that process in place, and understanding and going through that exercise internally is very important. And these days, it's going to be more likely than not that some data might go outside the organization we don't want to, and then we can now here, hopefully it's been useful for people to think about like minimizing that exposure of that leak. So if we're wasting water, let's try to waste the fewest amount of drops.
Yeah, certainly that tabletop exercise that you talk about, where companies do badly sometimes, particularly on the PR side, is either they say nothing or they say the wrong thing, and that's usually a result of time pressure, and that you don't have time to think out a good strategy. But if you have this tabletop exercise when there is no threat, there is no issue, and you've got time to sit down and draft out what the plan is going to be, what the communication looks like, because basically you have to reassure your customers that we understand there's a problem, so you have to acknowledge the problem. and you have to calmly explain that you're on top of it, you've got the best people on board, they're fixing it, they're minimizing the risk, and as you say, give out a little bit of information about what the risk is without exposing too much of that. It's a bit of a delicate exercise and not something that you want to do in the heat of the moment, but you want to do when things are calm and, before the event.
Yeah. And I just would like to maybe conclude that, like, when we are talking about what I think happened last year, what was quite common is this ransomware type of scenario where the cyber criminals are holding your data hostage and, like, asking for money. Going through that negotiation can be quite turbulent, and there are definitely like some specific templates and playbooks that, like, the industry has developed how to manage these scenarios. And obviously each company can have a different policy whether you actually pay the ransom or not, and then what are the consequences of doing either is. And then also I would say the last thing is then this kind of a post-breach recovery. So once the bad thing has happened, you've talked to your customers, you shared the information, like you're taking a reputation hit, like you weren't the guardian of the data, like how you recover your brand, in a way, and like what can you do to increase trust, like you're making more security investments, you're doing more training, you're improving your policy, your documentation, all of those things.
Yeah, and regaining that trust is really hard. Like it takes a long time to gain trust, but it only takes a small lapse of judgment or a small lapse of inattention or lack of maintenance or something, and you can lose that trust overall. Okay, so we've got a long list of things to do. Look, I've been around the traps for a long time in IT, but also in the Salesforce environment. And often why some of these things get missed is because we're busy. We have, a 40-hour week, and we shove into that as much as we can. And we try to do our best, and we're trying to keep the platform secure. We're trying to keep our customers happy, our internal and external customers. We're trying to keep our platform running efficiently. We're trying to improve it because it's this living, breathing thing. But as you've sort of indicated along the lines here, we don't have all of the tools built into Salesforce to manage all of these moving parts. And you mentioned back there that really horrified me that there were 15 different places that you needed to go to look at certain things. And I know that as an admin, I had a set of weekly tasks and monthly tasks and 3 monthly and 6 monthly. And look, I tried to stick to them, and most times I did. But, what about these things that just pop up overnight? Like if somebody, you mentioned before, somebody exporting all of our customer records, I would have no idea. I didn't have any tools that would help me limit the number of rows of data. So is this something that products like your product, Valo, can help me, keep my environment safe? I kind of need that wingman, to sort of keep have my back and keep me safe. Is that something that Valo is designed to do?
Absolutely. I appreciate the shout out, Daryl. So we built definitely Valo.ai, Valo.ai, just for this purpose that, having worked in a platform security team at Salesforce, building security health check, which is a nice utility for free. You can take a look on the configuration. You can keep an eye on the login history. You can keep an eye on the connected apps and all the 15 different properties and places in Salesforce. But, what I think many admins don't have is years of security training and ability to be that detective to spot the anomalies or behavior changes in Salesforce. And what they instead, I think, want to focus on is growing the business, help the company grow, smoothing out the workflow. So we built Valo.ai for this purpose, to bring all of the adoption intelligence, health and performance, better security and compliance in a tool, for busy Salesforce admins to immediately understand what is their security health, take action on things that the tool is reporting that admins should take a look into, and also deliver value in terms of understanding license assignments. So where the users are you using, and here's another scenario which is very common in Salesforce, where people connect on their own personal accounts all of these apps. And now if you have an app connected to Daryl's account, but there's a problem with that app, every other app, and including Daryl's own account, have to be frozen. So we need to really separate these duties and automations, for individual accounts. And while it's a lot of work in Salesforce and it's also expensive, we are kind of trying to ease it and make it easy and faster to highlight in which apps and in which user accounts certain actions seem relevant. And the tool is available in App Exchange, and anyone who wants to kind of test drive it can. It's a free trial, so recommend you to check it out also, Daryl.
Awesome. Yes. Well, as you know, I have checked it out, and some of the things that I really like is that, as I mentioned earlier, you need that sort of wingman. Like, yes, I can keep an eye on user logins and stuff like that, but only between 8 and 5. I'm not there 24/7. So, like, that's only a third of the day, 5 days a week. Well, we're going 7/24. 24/7. So who's looking after it all of those other hours? And if there's something happens at 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 hours have gone by until I get there in the morning, and maybe, just maybe, I notice it. Maybe I don't. Maybe it takes a couple of days until I notice it. By then, by which stage, our account records have all been exported, and the sales rep who did that has got his final check and he's out the door.
That's right. Yeah, I think every one of us can take a little extra helper in our daily lives, and I think for when it comes to Salesforce security, Valo is there to help out on most things. So I recommend anyone who's kind of like interested in the subject matter, but is looking for a kind of a turnkey solution rather than building their own stack and creating their own kind of blog and monitoring solution. So here's a way of doing the kind of getting access to the same results just within the same day as starting the trial.
Now, one complicated thing is, what if I'm a Salesforce partner and I'm managing the orgs for a number of small customers? Let's say I've got 20 or 30 small customers, and I'm customizing the environment for them, but I'm also their sort of trusted Salesforce person. That security sort of falls on me as well. So can I use Valo to manage like 20 or 30 of these little Salesforce instances? How can that help me there?
Yeah, 100%. So Valo doesn't have any limitations on the number of orgs you can connect to it. And it's really up to those customers whether they are okay with perhaps what their size is, and they have their own unique tooling requirements and other things. But absolutely, we have currently several consultants using Valo to connect to their custom environments and keep an eye on them 24/7. They don't have to have a dedicated login, but the Valo goes in and fetches the logs, fetches the configurations, all the insights, updates, and the changes, and then it sends you alerts via email. You can put it on Slack or Teams as well, and keeps you in the know what's going on with the customers. Even though on the times you're not necessarily doing work for that particular customer, you still get the value or the benefit of the monitoring. So if something happens, you can quickly be on the phone and talk to the client what you're seeing happen in their environment.
So that's a value add to a managed service provider, isn't it? That they can charge extra for. So we're talking about a managed Salesforce instance.
That's right. And I think this is becoming more and more important, as the Salesforce is really more of a platform and provides number of different workflows. And while many of these larger organizations are extracting login history and looking into these Salesforce logs, the security teams often don't know how to translate them. They're not necessarily sure what they're looking at. So that's where you, if you're a consultant, your partner, you have all that context. You become really valuable. You know that you know your customers, you know their head of sales, you worked with them before. You actually can connect with quite quickly into their environment what you're seeing.
Wow. My head spins. Yes. Well, look, I'm glad that we've got companies like yours with a team of experts with, many years of security expertise across lots of platforms, and also deep within the Salesforce platform as well, to be our wingman, to sort of have our back and when needed to provide that extra level of security. And so that's a great plug for your product. But look, I'm sure you're not the only one in that game, and we need to go back to our original intent, was that those connected apps are at risk. There's a new way of doing those. We need to move to the external client apps. Go read the release notes, reach out to your security professionals, your security experts. If you need assistance, read the release notes, and keep an eye on logs, keep an eye on, all of those environmental factors. We're more than just that sales app that a bunch of sales guys are using, and it's more of a overall platform that needs that, that big platform security service wrapped around it to keep everybody safe and keep these hackers at bay.
Well said, Daryl. So maybe a couple of last points of guidance from me in that same thought, as there's the connected apps are kind of like open by default. External clients apps are maybe more closed by default. Think about the same way with your permissions and separation of duties. Start thinking about what your users shouldn't have to take those permissions down, and let's all start narrowing down towards this concept of least privilege to make sure that all of us in the Salesforce ecosystem are safe for these future problems.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Jari. That's been a real eye-opener for me, and I really appreciate your wealth of security knowledge around this topic, and it's great to talk to you again.
Thank you, Daryl. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, bye now.
Thank you.